Hello again. My name's Adrian Gilbert, and I'd like to welcome you back once more to the Invisible College, where we are currently discussing the book of Revelation, the last book in the Bible, and we're reaching the climax after, I think this is episode 17, something like that. And at last we're getting to the bit that you've probably all been waiting for, which is the number of the beast. Yeah, 666. And what that's all about, what it means. What it means to be marked by the beast. Very scary stuff. And of course people have been writing and talking a lot about this, and I want to dispel certain ideas, and you'll see why as we go through. I'm going to give you a very different interpretation to what this is all about. It's nothing to do with people implanting chips into you. It's not Bill Gates injecting you with a vaccine that's going to program you to become some kind of cyborg. It's nothing to do with that. It's actually something that you will either choose or not choose. Yeah, it's not going to be forced on you. It's something that you will be accepting because you're indoctrinated to it. And you need to be aware of what that is and what it is that you are being lured into. Because I want you to understand this is something a bit more like a cult. You know, when you come across a cult, and I won't name names, Scientology or I don't know. Do you remember the Moonies? Some young moon. We don't hear much about them anymore. I think he died actually. But what happens with that typical cult is the person meets the cult and they are lured into it by being love bombed. In other words, the existing members, the staff, the teacher, whoever it is, will overwhelm them with welcoming and treat them very nicely, and there may even be women who give their favours to young men or vice versa to get them to join. I mean, that does happen in some cults. And then there becomes a period of indoctrination where they have to be taught the ways and the ideas of the cult and gradually programmed to it. But ultimately, there has to be a moment when they decide, yes, this is what I believe in. This is for me. This is it. And then they're marked, symbolically, you could say, with the mark of that cult. And they will proclaim to other people that that is who they are. So this mark of the beast, you've got to start thinking of it in those sorts of terms. So I'm going to explain all this to you, and I'm going to explain exactly what we're up against with this mark of the beast, which I think is actually something quite dreadful, and we'll take it from there. Now, just excuse me a minute while I get this all working. There we go. So, the mark of the beast, part 2. Now, if you haven't watched part 1, it might be a good idea to watch that one first. This one is standalone. You will understand what I'm talking about with this one, but you'll have a better understanding if you've already seen part 1, which I recorded a couple of weeks ago. So, let's start here. Now, chapter 13 of the book of Revelation, and that's where we're up to, presents us with a frightening image. 2 beasts, a monster with 7 heads and a lamb with 2 horns, are going to rule the world. Defying their rule will be to risk one's life. To be allowed to trade will require the acceptance of a mark of the beast. Now, I've been into all of that in part 1. And it's written there, if anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword must he be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. Now that sounds terribly frightening when you first read it. You think, oh my God, we're all going to be compelled at sword point, to have the mark, and if we don't, they're going to kill us. Well, that might happen in some cases, but it's really more saying that if it's your destiny, if this is what, you've been planning unconsciously will happen, that's what's going to happen. Because this is all to do with paying off previous expenses, you might call it. Karma, some people refer to it. So, but if it's, not everybody is slated to be slain with the sword. So I would caution you to think about that it's not necessarily saying that you're going to be held at sword point and forced to acknowledge this thing. It's going to be much more subtle than that. Now, the first beast comes out of the sea. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea, with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns, and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. Now, in the last video, I've discussed what this monster most likely symbolizes. It will be a world empire with some similarities to the old Roman Empire, but with absolute power. The power, we are told, comes from a 7-headed dragon, symbolizing Satan, who gives his throne, whatever that means, and we'll be coming to that, to the beast. And then it goes on. Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak, and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also it causes both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand, on the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast, or the number of his name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Now, I'm going to discuss this number. There's been a lot of strange things written on this whole subject. What is the number of the beast? And we're going to go through some of that. And then I'm going to show you what I think it's really about and who the man is. And it's not who you think. Clue, it's not Adolf Hitler. So, Revelation 13:18 tells us, this calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. So why is 666 both the number of the beast and of a man? Who is this man? In this program, we're going to look into this question from a number of different angles. After that, I'll give my own analysis and interpretation. Now, we're going to jump into the numerology here straight away. Now, for those of you who don't like arithmetic or mathematics, or the moment you see an equation, you think, oh, I can't be handling that. I'll switch off. I'll go and watch, I don't know, Neighbours or something. Don't worry, it's not difficult It's not difficult at all, and it's very simple. And you'll find it exciting and interesting as well. Right. So there's something that is peculiar about the number 666. It is the sum of all the numbers from 1 to 36. Now I've sort of written some of these numbers here. You can see the top line going up to 10, and I've sort of dotted, and then we finish off 34, 35, 36. Add all those up, 1 to 36, and it comes to 666. Even more interesting is that these 36 numbers can be arranged to give what is known as the magic square of the sun. Now, I was going to go into a whole subject of magic squares. There's one for each planet, but I thought, no, don't complicate the matter. But we do need to discuss this one just a little bit, because people do raise this when they're talking about 666. So you've got a matrix. A matrix merely means a table or a tabulation with rows and columns. And you can put the numbers into different boxes, as it were, in the matrix. And you can arrange these 36 numbers, because it's a 6 by 6 matrix. You can arrange them in such a way that if you go along the top row, or go along any of these rows actually, they'll add up to 111, and the same with the vertical rows, and the diagonals going from corner to corner come to 111. And this is called a magic square, and this one is the magic square of the sun. So the numbers from 1 to 36 are written in such a way that each row, column and diagonal adds up to 111. The total numbers given by the formula T equals n bracket n plus 1 over 2. Now don't freak out. T just means total. N is for number, and the number in this case is 36. If you were doing some different matrix, summing up the numbers, you would have a different number for n, but this one's 36. So it becomes 36 times 37 over 2. That's what T is equal to. And that's equal, if you can take that 2 off the bottom row under the 37 and divide it into the 36. So it comes to 18 times 37, which is 666. And you can work that out for yourself if you've got a pocket calculator. It's not difficult. And that is what's called the triangle of 36. And again, I'm not going to go into triangle numbers. I was going to, but I won't bother because I think it would just complicate the issue. But anyway, the number 666 is the sum of all the numbers from 1 to 36. Thus, one interpretation for 666, the number of the beast in Revelation 13, is that it stands for the magic square of the sun, perhaps symbolizing idolatrous worship of kings and emperors as solar deities. So I think you can understand that theory, that 666 is pointing us to the magic square of the sun, and the sun, previously in the past, many emperors and people had asked people to worship them as sun gods. So that's not unusual. And here we see, for example, it was common in the East for the king to be worshipped as a living god, even a sun god. I mean, this was true in Egypt and in Babylon. And in Egypt, the king would be called Horus. Ra Herakte, Ra the Horus, was one of the titles of the sun god. And yet the king was also worshipped as Horus. So he was kind of asking people to worship him as the kind of embodiment of the sun god on earth, at least while he was alive. And the same was true in other cultures. Now, in 27 BC, we're going to do a bit of history now, Augustus, who was the nephew of Julius Caesar, became the first emperor of Rome. Under him, Egypt and much of the Near East was consolidated into the Roman Empire. Now, you've probably seen the film or movie, if you're American, called Antony and Cleopatra, based on the play by William Shakespeare. And Cleopatra, she's the last queen of Egypt. And Antony falls in love with her. Previously, she's been the lover of Julius Caesar, who got murdered. Was it 44 BC, I think? Anyway, so she is the lover of Antony. And then there's a civil war. It's actually the second big civil war within a few years between Antony and his friend, Octavius, who changes his name to Augustus. And Augustus, or Octavius, goes to Egypt, and when he defeats Antony and the Egyptian fleet, the Battle of Actium, which is a naval battle, and then he goes to Egypt, to Alexandria. Cleopatra, Antony is murdered. Cleopatra kills herself with an asp. Augustus takes over, and he incorporates Egypt into the Roman Empire. And he does more or less the same thing with Palestine and later other bits of what had been the Greek Empire in Anatolia. So he consolidates these territories into the Roman Empire. And following the customs of the East, he declared that he was a god. After that, nearly all pre-Christian Roman emperors made the same claim. In other words, that they were gods. Before then, Roman generals or consuls, and even they did have the title imperator as a temporary title in time of extreme danger and warfare. They would appoint someone as a supreme imperator or emperor, but then when the danger was past, they would revert. But normally it was the consul was the top level, and you could only hold that, I think, for 1 year, or maybe it was 2 years, but I think it was only 1 year. So they had different rotation of people, but there were great generals and people, and eventually it was going to happen. It almost happened with Julius Caesar. It certainly happened under Octavius, who became Augustus. He became permanent emperor, and he declared that he was a god. And Augustus died in AD 14. So he was the emperor at the time Jesus was born, which is around, I believe, 7 BC. However, he does not seem to be the man referred to by the number 666. I don't think so, and I don't think anyone else does. So let's have another look at this number. And the Revised King James translation of the last verse of chapter 13 is as follows. This calls for wisdom. Let him who has understanding reckon the number of the beast. For it is a human number. Its number is 666. And this is what the interlinear Greek-English text for this verse 18, the last in chapter 13, you'll see it's rather different. And I'll put it under here to make it easier to read. And this is what you can see the Greek there, and here's what it translates as. Here is wisdom. The one having reason, let him count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and the number of it is 666. So that's suggesting that this is the number of the beast. However, that's not actually quite what it says. And when we look at this even more closely, we discover that the Greek word autou, which is here translated as of it, can also mean of him or his. And this makes more sense, as it would then read, here is wisdom, the one having reason. That means, you can calculate things in your head, you can work things out, you're not stupid. Let him count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. In other words, this is a number that belongs to a certain man. Right? So that makes more sense, I think. We now got to work out who that man is. Now, I'm sure some of you are familiar with this, but in many old languages, including Greek and Hebrew, the letters of the alphabet also had numerical values. I'll just hold it there for a minute. You know, it's not quite the same in Latin, but you know that in Latin they used Roman numerals, and those numerals were letters. For example, a capital I was a 1, a V, capital V was a 5, a capital X was a 10, yeah, a C was 100, and so on, you know, so they, and M, you know, for 1,000. They used letters as numbers. Now, God knows how they managed multiplication and division with that system. It must have really hamstrung their mathematical abilities. But that's how they did things. But it was even more so in other languages, particularly Greek and Hebrew, where every letter had a value. So, for example, in Greek, it goes alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta. So how many is that? Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota. Right, so that's the first 9 letters. And those would be counted 1 to 9. Yeah, alpha being 1. And then the next 9 letters, was it kappa, lambda, mu, nu, epsilon, pi. I forget how it all goes. But anyway, so it goes 10, those are counted as 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. And then the ones that come after that are hundreds. So it goes 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600. So you can take the letters, and each letter has a value. Now, actually, it is an interesting thing. I'm going to digress here for a moment. If we were doing that with English, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, etc., to be 1 to 9, and then the next 9 are going to be 10 to 90, and then the next one's 100 to 900. And we took those letters and we wanted to spell out 666. We could do it very easily with 3 letters that would total that. And the name that we might come up with would be Fox, F-O-X. I don't know if one of the Fox brothers is going to be the big dictator. I don't think so somehow. But I just thought I'd throw that in for a bit of fun. Anyway, so this symbol is called gematria, and it was used as a form of code. Now, many people over the ages have sought to identify the beast by examining the number of their names. And one of the most frequent identifications is the Emperor Nero, whose name in Hebrew letters can be spelled to give the number 666. Now, I'm told that this isn't actually exactly how people would normally spell it in Hebrew, but it can be done. And at first sight, this seems reasonable. As Nero was the first of the emperors to persecute Christians, this seemed to be a reasonable assumption. He was even alive, I think, when St. John was writing the Revelation. However, I believe we must look beyond gematria for the man's number. I don't think John, or the writer of the Revelation, Jesus was dictating it to him, was picking on Nero. I don't think that's right at all, and I'll show you why shortly. Now, it's important to remember that the beast is not a person. It's a world-dominating empire or authority. In other words, it has command over the entire world. Yet we're told that the number 666 is that of a man. What does this mean if it is not related to a name? Perhaps surprisingly, to answer this correctly, we must look at what the Bible tells us about one of its most colourful characters, who's King Solomon. Now then, a little bit of Bible history here. And Solomon was the 3rd king of Israel, the son of King David. You have to remember that there was a King Saul, first of all, that was chosen by the people. And David slew Goliath, and he was court harpist in Saul's court. He played the harp and composed psalms and sang. All well and good, but kind of things developed, and various battles were fought against Philistines, and eventually between Saul and the men who supported David. And Saul was overthrown and murdered, and David became king. David didn't approve that murder, by the way, but Saul was murdered. David became king of Israel, and he's a very good king on the whole. But he then had, when he died, his son, or one of his sons, had lots, Solomon became the next king. So he was the third king. And Solomon was noted for his wisdom. And early on in his reign, he was most famous for two events. The first of these was his judgment concerning which of two women was the real mother of a living baby and which of a dead one. He had two women, and I think they'd been sleeping in the same room, and one of them's baby died, and she swapped it with the other one, the other woman's baby. And then, the real mother complained to Solomon, and then he had to decide who was the real mother. So Solomon threatened to have the living baby cut in two, so that they could have half each. He knew that the real mother was the one who begged him to give the child to her rival rather than see it killed. Accordingly, he found in her favour. So this is taken as a symbol of this wisdom of Solomon, who can work out which of these women was the real mother by her attitude, actually, towards a living baby. And then the second famous act was the building of the first temple in Jerusalem. And the purpose of this temple was to provide a secure home for the Ark of the Covenant. And it also contained an outside area with an altar where the required sacrifices of animals could be performed. Right, so this is a big deal. He built the first temple in Jerusalem. And King David had wanted to build this, but it was left to his son Solomon to carry out the plan. So far, so good. Solomon's doing a good job. He's wise. He decides which woman's the right one for the baby, has the temple built, has the money to do it, and employs Hiram of Tyre to come and bring cedar logs and build the temple. So far, so good. Solomon's done the right stuff. He's a wise man. He's decided the right mother, and he's got the temple built, which is a major achievement. But it goes much further than this, and his story continued. And he kind of starts going off of it, to put it mildly. Thus, in his early days, Solomon was a wise king. During his reign, the kingdom of Israel reached its peak, both in power and wealth. Unfortunately, Solomon had a weakness for women. His downfall, this is how it seems to be, was that he was addicted to sex. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines, and many of these were foreign women. I mean, come on, most of us have enough to do to keep one wife happy. Perhaps if you're a Muslim, you might maybe have 4. But 1,000 or 700 wives and 300 concubines? I mean, goodness knows how many children then. Yeah, it's extraordinary. I think even Genghis Khan, well, he was another one that was that way inclined, would find it hard to keep up. But anyway, so that was one part of the whole thing with Solomon. But also he became addicted to wealth, as we shall see. And anyway, to keep his wives happy, he allowed them to practice their own religions in Israel. And this was in clear contravention of the oath taken by the Israelites that they would have only one God. In other words, if you were in Israel, you were only allowed or supposed to worship the one God, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And God in the Old Testament, anyway, gets very uptight with people that start building altars on high places and worshipping Baal, let alone Moloch, and these other foreign gods. that were being imported. But Solomon's kind of turning a blind eye to this, and it starts the seduction of the people into these other cults. And that's the start of the rot that set into the kingdom of Israel right at the time of its height. As a result of these transgressions, God told him that his kingdom would be divided. However, for his father David's sake, this would happen only after his death. And indeed, this did happen after his death, after Solomon died. I think his son, there's two guys, there's one called Jeroboam and the other called Rehoboam. And I think Jeroboam was the son. I might have got that the wrong way around. But anyway, he ups the taxes even more, and the people complain, "Hey, we're already paying too much tax." And he says, "You thought you were taxed hard by my father, but I'm going to tax you even harder." Well, of course, they rebel. The northern tribes, 10 tribes, rebel against him, and they appoint their own king, who's Rehoboam, or maybe he's Jeroboam. I get mixed up with these two. Anyway, the net result was the kingdom of Israel was split. You had a 10-tribe Israel in the northern part, and they had a new capital, which was in Samaria. And you had the 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, in the south, whose capital was still Jerusalem, along with most of the Levitical priests. And they formed the kingdom of Judah, which becomes Judea, and the Judeans is the name that we now call Jews. The Jews and the Judeans, the people of Judah, are who the Jews are descended from. The Israelites were a different bunch up in the northern kingdom, and they disappear from history as the lost tribes. And I've talked about them a little bit before, and I will do other programs on that before. It doesn't matter right here. Anyway, so Solomon's told his kingdom's going to be divided after he dies. Big tragedy, and the start of many, many big troubles. And Solomon was also the wealthiest of all the kings of Israel and Judah. Yeah, Solomon's noted for his wealth. You probably have never read any Rider Haggard books. Certainly not if you're young. I mean, they're far too politically incorrect for you to read today, because he was writing about the British Empire and people exploring Africa and things, and it's not, let's put it, it's not politically correct in today's terminology. But you've probably read or you've heard of one of his books, which was called King Solomon's Mines, where the hero goes to look for the fabled mines of King Solomon in Africa with all the treasure. Great story. They should make films based on Rider Haggard's books. If only they can get over their political correctness. They'll probably have to be totally rewritten for that. But anyway, great books, great stories, sort of Indiana Jonesy type things. Anyway, so Solomon was also the wealthiest of all the kings of Israel. This came partly from trade, partly from tribute, but also from heavy taxation. And we read in chapter 9 of 2nd Chronicles about Solomon's extreme wealth. Now have a look at this chapter 9 of 2 Chronicles. Now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold, beside that which the explorers and merchants brought. So there you've got it in black and white in the Bible itself, 666. That's the number of talents, that Solomon was getting. This is taxation. A talent was a weight roughly. You could have 2 talents. You could carry on, what do you call it? A yoke. You could manage to carry 2 talents. They're pretty heavy. Big lump of gold like this. And he had 666 of those, so this is the richest man in history. That's just his income for 1 year, right? So he's fabulously wealthy. And of course it corrupts him, all these wives and the worship of these other gods. He's allowing, maybe he's doing a little bit of even himself. This is the problem, and this is the 666 and where it comes from. And this is the only place in the Bible, beside the Revelation, that the number 666 is spelled out. It is connected with gold, which is traditionally the metal associated with the sun. As we have seen, the magic square of the sun also totals to 666. So I think there can be little doubt, certainly not in my mind, that the man is saying, look, use your nous, use your intelligence. The number of the man is 666. If you ever read your Bible, you'd think, oh yeah, I've come across that number before. Yeah, it was Solomon, wasn't it? Yeah, go back, have a look at that. You know, Second Chronicles. Oh, there it is, 666 talents of gold. There it is. You don't have to think about it any further. And it amazes me that nobody points this out. Anyway, it does not take a genius to work out that the man whose number is 666 is a reference to Solomon. So what is his mark? The Greek word for mark is charagma. Charagma. A literal translation of this word, this is what I've got from Google Translate, is notch. In the parlance of the times, we can imagine that this is a reference to a mark or notch cut into wood, clay, metal, or some other substance in order to make a seal. Those receiving the mark by impression of the seal are being given a mark that indicates that they belong to the beast. Now, we use seals and marks today. I don't know if you know this, but in Great Britain, there is the seal of each sovereign has their own seal. Right? So Queen Elizabeth II, who's, God bless her, been on the throne for, I think it's 70 years. Or will it be next year? So I'm not sure. But anyway, she has a seal, and there's she doesn't have to do the sealing herself, but each time an act of Parliament is passed through Parliament, it then has to pass under the Great Seal to be sealed into law. And when the monarch dies, they destroy that seal and they make a new one for the next monarch. So that you can't have laws retrospectively passed pretending to be signed by the previous monarch or earlier monarchs. Those seals are destroyed. So this is something that we have in this country. I think they do the same thing in America with the Great Seal of the United States. I'm not sure. But this is certainly true here. So we can imagine that Solomon has a seal and he can mark things with his seal. This is marked by the king and sealed by him. Signed, sealed and delivered. Yeah, we have that expression, don't we? So what is this seal? This mark's clearly the opposite of the mark which in chapter 7 is put on the 144,000 from the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, I'm not going to go into that here. I've done a whole program on that. But the 144,000 are 12,000 from each of the tribes of Israel. There are 12 tribes. 12 times 12 is 144. So 12 times 12,000 is 144,000. See, I can do arithmetic. And they have a mark put on them, which shows that they belong to Jesus. Yeah? That they are the elect. They are the ones who've been sent here to do the work. This is a mark which is completely the opposite of that. And that's how we need to understand this mark, the mark of the beast. You either have the mark of the Christ or you have the mark of the beast. Which are you going to have? Yeah, take your choice. Which mark do you want? So what is the mark of the beast then? Well, it's got to be to do with Solomon, isn't it? In my opinion, it must be none other than the so-called Seal of Solomon, which looks like that. And we're familiar with this as a symbol representing Judaism. It's actually on the Israeli flag. But actually, it is thousands of years older than this. So I don't want you to go around thinking that I'm being anti-Jewish here. I'm not. This is, yes, it is used by Judaism, but it's used by a lot of other places too. And I'm going to show you where I think this symbol is being applied today. And it's not where you think. So the six-pointed star motif is found in India, where it is called a Shatkona. And you can see it there. You've got a statue, I think it's probably Vishnu, that one, I'm not sure, standing in front of the Shatkona, which is a six-pointed star. And it symbolizes the merging of two triangles, an upward moving one, which is female or Shakti, to use the Indian terminology, and a downward moving one, male or Shiva and Shakti. So this is kind of how they think about the six-pointed star in terminology of India and yoga. And it's also linked to the so-called Anahita or heart chakra in yoga. So you can see drawing there of the Anahita chakra, which I believe has 12 petals. You can count them if you like. And drawn inside that is the six-pointed star. And that's supposed to be the chakra of the heart, which actually, this whole idea of chakras, we do have centers in our body. And if you train yourself and you start developing, you will feel these things and you will feel energy moving through them. And they can open like flowers. But that again is a whole other subject. And Jesus is often shown statues of Jesus with the heart there radiating out. This is heart chakra, radiating out his love upon the world. So it is in Christianity as well, but in perhaps a more concealed form. And then look here, six-pointed star is also present in a hidden way in the layout of Stonehenge. Now who would have guessed that, eh? And this goes back to at least 2000 BC, which is before the time of even Abraham. So here in Britain, we've got six-pointed star, and you can see it here. I've drawn it out for you. I've followed the plan of John Michel, but I've redrawn it myself to check. And yeah, it works. And you've got the six-pointed star inside this circle of blue stones, and the star itself encloses the trilithons, where there are 5 of those, and there's one that's left open. And then you've got a square and a squared circle, which are related. The circle is the Sarsen circle of, is it 32 or 36? I think it's 36 stones that go around the outside. And then you can draw a square. The circle will contain the circle that contains the six-pointed star. I mean, it's amazing that this plan is geometric. And yet nobody talks about this. They'll tell you everything you'd like to hear about digging it out with deer antlers and burying, high caste people and having a feast. But nobody ever talks about the geometry, except for one man, the late John Michel. And I had the pleasure of knowing John. He's a good bloke. We had some good chats and we exchanged letters. Didn't know him all that well, but I'm very interested in one of his books at least. He discovered the hidden pattern that underlies Stonehenge. And this complex design implies ancient knowledge concerning architectural systems based on both the Seal of Solomon and the squaring of the circle. And I can tell you a lot about some of his ideas to do with metrology, which is this science of measurement, and how that relates to the ancient measures, to our imperial system of measures, which have been so rudely and stupidly abandoned in this whole quest for modernity, and the introduction of the meter and the kilogram and all these things, which are actually lose the whole meaning of the connection between heaven and earth. But that's a whole other subject, and I'm not going to go into it. But John Michel was really into that subject in a big way. John Michel wrote about this in his book City of Revelation, and this book will be referred to again in later lectures concerning New Jerusalem. So I will be talking about that there, but that's going to be in later lectures. So what have we got now? Yes. Now, not to be left out, the six-pointed star, known as the Seal of Solomon, Khatem Suleiman, is also found in Islamic art. Here it's impressed on a coin, and you can see there a six-pointed star. So this is actually impressed. So you're getting the sense now of something being stamped, impressed into a coin to give you the show that this is a genuine currency to be used. And this is in Islam, so it's not in Judaism, and so it's not just the Jews, is what I'm getting at here, who use the six-pointed star. And there are also Arabic legends that King Solomon possessed a magic ring. Now we're getting a bit closer, aren't we? By which he could control jinns or genii. The jinns are demonic spirits and are spoken of in the Quran. It's likely the origin of the story of Aladdin's magic ring in the 1001 Nights. Now, you remember, I'm sure you've been to see the pantomime of Aladdin, and you know, Aladdin and the lamp, out comes the genie. But he also has a ring in the 1001 Nights. I don't know if they have that in the pantomime, but that's the one he rubs first, and genie comes out and gives him 3 wishes. This is kind of the idea is that Solomon had sealed up these jinns or genies, these demons, made them work for him. And so they were bottled up, and then they could be released, and they would be thankful. Yes, Master, I'll do you 3 wishes. And then, of course, this demon's released into the world. Not necessarily a good thing at all. But anyway, here's the idea, this seal of Solomon on a ring. So what you can imagine is that Solomon had his sealing ring, and his edicts he would stamp, you know, with his ring, like the Queen does with her stamp with our laws. So this idea of a signet ring, you know, men wear signet rings, and originally that would have a seal. So you could seal in sealing wax with your ring to signify that that was something that you had sent. And this is very important, you know, in times when very few people could read and write. But they could recognize your ring, which would probably have your coat of arms on it. So this would be the equivalent of a coat of arms of Solomon. Now, King Solomon is said to have had such a ring, which he used as a seal, containing the name of God and also a 6-pointed star. He is said to have used it to command demons to do his bidding. Today, perhaps for the same purpose, replicas of his ring are sold on the internet. Now, I haven't got one of these rings, but I can imagine there are people who are into magic who go out and buy a Seal of Solomon ring so they can call up demons. A really stupid thing to do, because they might actually turn up. And then what are you going to do? But you know, there are stupid people around, and I would advise you not to do things like that. Don't play with magic for any reason at all. It's extremely dangerous, and will certainly mark you with the beast, the mark of the beast. So Solomon's ring reminds us of the mark of the beast, which similarly seals those who do not already have the mark of God. Right, so now we're getting a bit nearer, I think. But I'm going to take you into some very, very deep stuff. And do stay with me to the end of this lecture. Don't run away. Don't go off. So I've had enough. I've found out now, right, Solomon's ring. No, we're going much deeper, and I'm going to show you how that ties in with our modern world. And it's going to be ways that you would never guess, except if you knew and you were being guided to see this. Now, I've called this section Mark of the Beast and the Birth of the New Age. Now, why have I done that? Well, we must now turn our attention to Theosophy. And this is a philosophical religious movement which was founded by Madame Blavatsky in the late 19th century. Now, Theosophy also uses the 6-pointed star, but before I go into that, why have I talked about Theosophy? Well, in many respects, you could call Theosophy, and I'm sorry, Theosophists, I've actually lectured at a Theosophical centre before now. I didn't know this at the time, or I might not have done. But I've been in what was Madame Blavatsky's house and lectured there. But Theosophy, in many respects, is the great, however many greats are needed, grandmother of the New Age movement. And I'll show you how that works as we progress with this. Madame Blavatsky was this really quite strange woman who came to the West and taught a new religion, which was very much at odds with Christianity, but we'll go into that. So Theosophy also uses the six-pointed star. This is their seal as part of its logo. It is of interest because it is the great-great-grandparent, however many greats you need, of what we now call the New Age. Although largely unknown by the general public, I mean, how many people here have ever heard of Theosophy? It has had a profound an influence on the development of modern culture. In its own way, it's had as much impact as Marxism. Now, I want you to take that on board, that, you know, we're very familiar now with Marxism and how that's led into cultural Marxism and all of the chaos that we're now seeing, you know, in America particularly, but all over the world, undermining cultures, undermining, well, it was terrible in Russia. You know, they had 70 years of tyranny, which they've managed to throw off. It's still a tyranny, Marxist tyranny in China, and it's spreading into the West. But in many ways, Theosophy is just as important. You know, all of the things that, the bad aspects of the New Age, which leads so often into drug addiction, and so, you know, undermines the faith in Christianity and leads people into all sorts of strange cults. We can take that back pretty much to Madame Blavatsky and Theosophical Society, which began in 1875. So, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, or HPB, was a Russian lady who came to the West, and she claimed to have visited Tibet and have been instructed in occult matters by masters of wisdom. And she certainly had psychic powers and could manifest objects such as letters from her masters. Her books, which she claimed were revealed to her psychically, are extraordinarily complex. She dictated them to an assistant. It is hard to believe she composed them on the fly herself. She claimed to be reading them psychically. Now, I'll just say a few words here about that. She would sit at a desk, and a Colonel Alcott, who's a colonel from the Civil War, was a great friend of hers and fellow founder of the Theosophical Society. Now, I don't think that they had any kind of sexual relationship or marriage or anything like that. They worked together. And he would sit on one side of the table, she would sit on the other. And she would look up and she would read psychically. She claimed to be able to see certain documents that her masters were projecting to her third eye. And she could read it. And she would dictate what she was reading. She was reading in Sanskrit, so she says. And she would translate it, or the translation would be put into her head, and she would read out what was being translated, and he would write it down. This is in her books, The Secret Doctrine, and she calls these the stanzas of Jhana. And Jhana being like San, and Sanskrit being the writings of San. So a very early script, and these early doctrines and teachings she claimed to be writing down, and then commentary, and two big volumes of commentaries on these books. And I don't believe that she was just making this up on the fly. I believe that she was receiving these images and documents psychically. There are people, I've met many, well, not many, but I've met quite a few psychics, and some of them do have extraordinary powers of clairvoyance, and I think she was one of them. The question is, where were they coming from? That's the big thing. and she called what she taught Buddhism, which is spelled with only one D. In actuality, it bears little similarity to what is taught by the Dalai Lama or other Buddhist teachers. In reality, it was occultism with an Indian flavour and satanic overtones. Now, she also had no qualms about praising the devil or Lucifer as our guide. I'll read it to you here. In her most famous book, The Secret Doctrine, she writes, "There is no devil or the utterly depraved, as there are no angels absolutely perfect, though there may be spirits of light and darkness. Thus Lucifer, the spirit of intellectual enlightenment and freedom of thought, is metaphorically the guiding beacon which helps man to find his way through the rocks and sandbanks of life. For Lucifer is the Logos in his highest and the adversary in his lowest aspect, both of which are reflected in our ego." And you'll find that actually in The Secret Doctrine, Volume 2, page 162. Right? If you are so moved to go and check up on me, that's where you'll find it. And then we see from this passage in her Secret Doctrine is as follows. We see from this passage her secret doctrine is as follows. A dismissal of good and evil as objective realities. Everything is to be understood as relative. In other words, there can be no sin and therefore no judgment of sin. B. The denial of the existence of a devil. All beings are a mixture of good and bad, though some are of light and some of darkness. Lucifer, i.e. Satan, as the light bearer, is the guiding beacon for man. He is the patron of intellectual enlightenment and freedom of thought. C. Lucifer, i.e. Satan, as the light bearer, is the guiding beacon for man. He is the patron of intellectual enlightenment and freedom of thought. D. Lucifer, not Christ as is taught in the Bible, is the Logos, i.e. the incarnation of the Word of God. He is also in his lower aspect the adversary, i.e. the planet Saturn in astrology, who challenges us only so that we may gain strength. So in her opinion, or in her writings, he's the good guy, leading us to enlightenment and freedom of thought. God, is the bad boy. He's the bad guy. He may have made us, but so what? Probably didn't make us anyway, stopping us from developing our full potential. That's the teaching at the root of Theosophy, whatever else they might tell you. And she was contemptuous of Christianity. And we get a taste of this in this passage from another pair of her books that she tends to write them in 2-volume sets. This one's called Isis Unveiled. The present volume, Isis Unveiled, Isis Unveiled, have been written to small purpose if they have not shown, 1, that Jesus, the Christ God, is a myth concocted 2 centuries after the real Hebrew Jesus died. 2, that therefore he never had any authority to give Peter or anyone else plenary power. Plenary means handing out the power to subordinates. 3, that even if he had given such authority, the word Petra, right, that's Latin for rock, referred to the revealed truth of the Petroma, which is Greek for rock, not to him who thrice denied him. And Peter denies Jesus 3 times, as you know, in the Gospels. And that besides, the apostolic succession is a gross and palpable fraud. So she's got no time at all for popes claiming to be receive their authority handed down to them from St. Peter. Actually, I tend to rather agree with that, but that's another story. 4, that the Gospel according to Matthew is a fabrication based upon a wholly different manuscript. The whole thing, therefore, is an imposition alike upon priest and penitent. So she's really damning Christianity. She's got no time for it. She thinks, yes, maybe there was a preacher called Jesus, a Hebrew preacher, who walked around and maybe even got crucified, but probably didn't die. And then this whole Christian religion that's built up on that, to her, it's just complete fabrication and fantasy. So I think we're entitled to say that what she's teaching is anti-Christian, antichrist, in a very real sense, in that she's championing Lucifer, playing down Christ. So I think we're entitled to say that this is an anti-Christian doctrine. Reading through these works, it's clear that Blavatsky's philosophy is profoundly at odds with both Judaism and Christianity. Underneath an elaborate facade of complicated esotericisms and references to imaginary world history, her secret doctrine was Luciferianism. And there you can see Lucifer, or Satan, tempting Eve. According to this teaching, the devil in the Garden of Eden was the good guy. He was revealing to Adam and Eve a path by which they could gain knowledge equal to that of God himself. Lucifer, Latin for light bearer, is another name for Satan. HPB, that's Helena Petrova Blavatsky, chose this name for the monthly magazine of the Theosophical Society. She edited and published the first edition herself in September 1887. Now you can see a cover of it. From 1889 to 91, the editor was Annie Besant, a Marxist agitator, Fabian, early feminist and champion of all things radical. Oh, we've got plenty of them around now. After Blavatsky died in 1891, Besant carried on editing Lucifer. However, in 1897, to give the society wider appeal, its Luciferian origins were hidden. The magazine was renamed the Theosophical Review. Under this name, it continues to this day. So superficially, the seal of the Theosophical Society is simply an syncretism, that's a joining together, of symbols drawn from diverse religions and cultures. The motto, "There is no religion higher than truth," appears hard to argue with. On the face of it, the seal seems harmless enough. However, closer examination of these symbols tells a different story. For example, there's a swastika up there. Well, she was there. She had it before, the Germans adopted it for their flag, but it's there, and we got this serpent. I'll be coming to that in a minute. The serpent biting its tail is an old Gnostic symbol. Gnostics were a branch of Christianity. It comes from gnosis, meaning knowledge. So they claim to be people who had personal knowledge, initiation. So they understood things better than other people. Gnostic symbol for repetition of time. However, it can also signify the planet Saturn, or Kronos, the old god of time itself. What we call Saturn is called Satan in the Bible, who accuses mankind before God. And we read of this in the book of Job, and I'm not going to read that out to you. You can look that up yourself in the book of Job, how this very good man, Job, in his council, Satan is there as the accuser. And God says, "Look at my man Job. Isn't he great? He does all the right things. He sacrifices, he keeps the law. He's a wonderful guy." And Satan says, "Yeah, well, that's only because you've been kind to him, given him stuff and looked after him. You try taking that away, see how he gets on." So God says, "All right, you try. I'll give you permission. Take the stuff away and see how he gets on." So poor old Job, he loses all his wealth, his children and his wife are killed, and he's homeless. There's Satan, Saturn, laying it on him. And the next time God and Satan meet, God says, "Well, look at Job. He's still a good man. He's still doing everything right, and he's taking his hardships with great forbearing, and He's my man. So he says, yeah, that's all right. Well, that's because he's feeling okay. Give him some illness, see how he gets on after that. So God says, all right, you try him. So then Satan smites him with boils and awful illness, and he feels it. He's in terrible state. And Job, there's a long poem, he complains about his situation, but he's still forbearing with it. And next time Satan comes on, God's able to say to him, look, see, he's still a good man, even though you've done all that awful stuff to him. And God rewards Job for his honesty and his faithfulness by giving back all the riches. He has new wives and new family, new palaces to live in. Everything's returned to him, probably more than before. And his days are extended. So that's the story of the book of Job. So Satan in there is a personality who turns up at court and acts as the one who challenges about mankind, and wants the worst for us. And that's Saturn in astrology. Saturn is the one that brings all your sins up to be examined and accounted for, and punishment meted out. So this is Saturn in this Hebrew tradition in the book of Job. Now, in esoteric Christianity, it's taught that all of creation stems ultimately from God, the divine intelligence or creator. So it's written Deus, that's Latin for God, in that sort of big sun type thing at the top, radiating out energy and power. And then you have this sort of spiraling downwards, and these little souls proceed down. You can see these little winged souls, and they come down through these celestial spheres. And you first of all go through spheres of angels, the seraphim, cherubim, dominions, thrones, potentates, principates, virtues, archangels, angels, and then you come to the Caelum stellatum, that's the sphere of the stars, and then below that is the sphere of Saturn. Now, as far as people in before, I think it's 18 something or other, 17 something, when they discovered Uranus, the planet Uranus, and then later discovered Neptune, people thought Saturn was the outermost planet. So you come down here and you reach the solar system with Saturn, which I've coloured in red here. And then the souls proceed down through the spheres of the planets, through the spheres of the elements. So you have, you go down to lunar, and then it's ignis, fire, air, aqua, which is water, and terra, which is earth. And the souls end up incarnating on the earth. But they're bottled in here by Saturn. So it's thought to be the outermost planet of the solar system. The sphere of Saturn separated the solar system from the sphere of the fixed stars and the higher heavens beyond. It was Saturn, i.e. Satan, that imprisoned mankind in endless cycles of time. Right, so this is kind of an esoteric teaching, which you would find it in Gnostic traditions, certainly. You find it in certain other esoteric traditions of Christianity. You also find it in the Hermetica, in Hermetic traditions, the idea of coming down through the spheres. And the serpent biting its tail is an old Gnostic symbol for repetition of time. However, it can also signify the planet Saturn or Kronos, the old god of time itself. Now, there are other things that the serpent can symbolize, and I've talked about those in other lectures. But that's what I want to focus on here, the connection with the planet Saturn. And what we call Saturn is called Satan in the Bible. I've said that before, didn't I? Who accuses mankind before God in the book of Job. And the planet Saturn was considered to be man's jailer because our sins produce karma that we ourselves cannot erase. In other words, if you're in debt, you can't pay off your debts. What are you going to pay them with? That's why Christians believe that Jesus Christ came down from the higher heavens. I'm not going to say how high, right at the top, I would think, as a suffering Messiah, and was therefore able to wash away our sins with his own blood. And this teaching is the very opposite of Luciferianism. I mean, the Luciferianism, the teaching there is that we want to become enlightened. The enlightenment is all about that. It's about finding out more knowledge, working things out by our own skill and cleverness. We can do stuff. We can make things better. That is the Luciferian approach, and I'm afraid it is actually the approach of virtually all education today. We might not call it that, but that is what it is. The whole idea of science. I studied science. I studied for a degree in science and chemistry. But I've since realized that is not the path. That is not the way. Science, at the very best, is hacking creation. It's not understanding it. It's making theories and ideas, and which may more or less coincides with parts of the truth, but it's never fully correct. And so it's always only as good until someone comes up with a better theory. And it doesn't explain everything by any means. That trying to defeat creation through our own will and our own intelligence and our own enlightenment is the Luciferian path. But that's not the right path. That will never get us to the goal we want to go. We want to go back round the spiral and back up to God. And that means reconnecting with with God wisdom, and with the intelligence of the higher self, the higher levels of creation. We have to religio. Religio means retie. Ligio is Latin for I tie. So you need to retie yourself to God, so you can get back and leave this world, go through the spheres of the planets, of Saturn, of the fixed stars, up creation, up through the angelic spheres to God himself. That's what you want. But you won't get there just by following Luciferian pathways. They can't take you there. So the motto, "There is no religion higher than truth," should also not be taken at face value. Firstly, what is truth? Is the Theosophical Society to be treated with revealingness? I mean, do they know the truth? What the motto implies is there's no religion higher than what is being taught by the Theosophical Society. Yeah? Don't bother with religion, you just got to find truth, so keep digging with your mind. And the truth, as we have already noted, is a substitute religion of enlightenment, i.e. Luciferianism. Its teachings are called Illuminism, and its priesthood are Illuminati, i.e. illumined ones. Now, on the cover of the collected works of Blavatsky's Lucifer magazine, we see another curious symbol. This is a horseshoe-shaped laurel wreath. What does this mean, and where does it come from? That's a good question, isn't it? In fact, the laurel wreath is a symbol that was much used by the Roman Empire. During the earlier Roman Republic, it symbolized victory. Victorious generals would be awarded a laurel crown and then parade through the streets to the adulation of the crowds. After the Republic was dissolved and the Empire started, that was with Augustus, as I was saying earlier, 28 BC, it changed its meaning. Thenceforth, it signified the authority of the state in the name of the emperor. Now, you remember the story in the Bible of Jesus and the Pharisees are tempting him and says, you claim to be a teacher. Here's a coin. Who should this coin be given to? Should it be given, in taxes to the Roman Empire or to God? You claim to be God's man. What do you say? And that was a trap, because if you say, oh, it's got to be for God, then he's in trouble with the Roman authorities. On the other hand, if he says it's for the Romans, then he's in trouble with the people. So it's a trap. And what Jesus says is, render unto Caesar what is Caesar, and unto God what is God's. And yes, on that coin, it was probably one of these. This is a coin, a denarius of Tiberius, who ruled as Roman emperor AD 14 to 37. Jesus was alive and teaching then. It's therefore very likely that it was a coin of this type that what he referred to as belonging to Caesar. And it's got Caesar's face on it. Render unto Caesar what's Caesar's. If you look on the coin, you'll see Tiberius is wearing a crown of laurels. Yeah, you can see them there on his head. Imperial coins always have the emperor's portrait with him wearing the laurels. Now someone's going to come up with a coin and show me, hey, Adrian, you got that wrong. This emperor didn't wear one. Well, I don't know. I've not seen that. But as far as I know, all the emperors used to wear laurels on their coins. And here we can see this SPQR is an abbreviation for the Latin words Senatus Publisque Romanus, meaning Senate and the Roman people. Yeah, que means and is attached to the publis, meaning the public, the Roman people. So that's where that symbol comes from. And it was often inscribed on public buildings and military banners, enclosed by the two conjoined sprigs of laurel that would make up a wreath of victory. Right? So this version is on a piece of lead, is currently for sale on eBay if you want to buy it. I think it's about $400 or something, $500 maybe. It's clearly a seal of authority denoting state property. So there you have it. Now look at this. It's the flag of the United Nations. I hope you recognise it. Notice the subtle use of the Roman laurels. The pretense is that these are olive branches representing peace. However, this is not true. These are Roman-style laurels. Olive branches don't look like that. You know, in symbolism, they have rounded ends. They don't have pointy bits, pointed ends. That's laurel. Those are laurels. It may seem surprising, but the badge or seal has a direct connection with both the Theosophical Society logo and Imperial Rome. Like the European Union, the United Nations is a body of unelected officials. It has 6 principal organs. I'm going to list them here. It's the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, Trusteeship Council, which has been inactive since 1994, the International Court of Justice, and the UN Secretariat. And most of these are shadowy organs, unknown to the general public, although it funds them. And the UN runs some 17 agencies, covering everything from agriculture to aviation to tourism, finance and education. Here are just a few of them. So you've got UNESCO, which is United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. You've got the International Monetary Fund, the World Health Organization, that's been in the news a lot lately, isn't it? And the World Bank, and there's lots of other ones. That's just a few. Before we go to that, I just want to point out something, that the United Nations is the nearest thing we have to a world government. In fact, it wants to become a world government. That's the whole purpose of it. I hope you realise that. It's set up as this voluntary talking shop for the nations to get together so they don't start another world war. But that's like the European Union, which was started up as the idea of a trading bloc between the nations of Europe. And over time, they gradually take more and more power and authority. And before you know it, they've morphed themselves into a European Union instead of a European Economic Community. And they've started appointing presidents, and they've started having their own parliament, and they have their own flag, and they have their own currency. And it starts to look more and more like it's becoming a state in its own right, and taking away the sovereignty of the independent states of Europe. stealing it into the central body, which nobody has elected. We have a president, of the EU, Ursula von der Leyen. I haven't voted, well, I wouldn't now because I'm out of it, but nobody in the European Union has elected this woman to be their president. And yet she can decide whether they get vaccines or not and when. It's incredible, this leeching of power towards this unelected body. And that's being done in other places over the world under the auspices of the United Nations, which wishes to become the world government, no doubt with a world emperor eventually. Who's it going to be? Tony Blair? Yeah, I wouldn't put it past him trying. But that's what we're talking about with the United Nations. And I'm going to tell you some more horrifying things here. So the New York headquarters of the UN has its own surprising secret, a curious chapel, which they call a quiet room for meditation. There's the United Nations building in New York, right? And here's the chapel, the meditation room inside the UN building in New York. And you think, well, that's all right, Adrian, what's the problem with that? Go, nice quiet room, put a few chairs in there, I suppose, and you can sit down and quietly think. Oh, okay. But what's that big lump in the middle? What's that for? The room has a strange altar stone of magnetite and was built according to the wishes of former UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld. I remember the headlines in the papers. Dag's dead in '61 when his plane was shot down over Uganda or somewhere in Tanzania, I don't remember which, in East Africa anyway. Maybe it was the Congo. Congo crisis was about that time. Anyway, he wrote poetry and he was very much into mysticism, and he was a member of something else that we're going to come up to in a second. It was administered by the Lucis Trust, but who are they? He was a member of the Lucis Trust. So what is the Lucis Trust? It's an organization originally founded by an American lady called Alice Bailey. She had previously been a theosophist, but split off, that's the Theosophical Society we've been talking about before with Madame Blavatsky, but split off to form her own movement. Her main activity was in writing and publishing books on all manner of occult subjects. These are kept in print by the Lucis Trust. This has its offices in a tower block on United Nations Plaza in New York, close to the UN building itself. Right, so we're getting to modern times now. She only died in 1949, and that's within living memory of many people. But look at this. Lucis Press was originally called Lucifer Publishing. The name was no accident. Like Madame Blavatsky, Bailey regarded Lucifer as the real saviour of mankind. She believed that the so-called fallen angels were really high-level beings who had descended to the earth from the sun. Remember what I was saying about the sun? 666, the magic square of the sun? This, she said, was a big sacrifice for them to make. They did it in defiance of God to bring illumination and wisdom to mankind. So she's seeing these fallen angels as sort of Prometheus spirits coming to earth to bring enlightenment and teachings to mankind in defiance of the will of God. Well, actually, that's not so very different from what's taught in the Bible about the fallen angels and how they corrupted mankind. And you can read all about that in the book of Enoch, and taught mankind things that they shouldn't have done, and brought about the fall of man. So it's not so different, it's just the spin is different. So why is there a Luciferian silent room inside the headquarters of the UN? Now I'd like to just point out here, this block is made of magnetite. And that magnetite, as the name might suggest, it's an ore of iron, but you can magnetize it. I don't know if this has been magnetized. I've not been in there myself. But it'd be interesting to take a compass in there and see if it moves around, if you walk around that thing. Perhaps it's no accident that New York is where Madame Blavatsky first started her Luciferian Theosophical Society and its magazine Lucifer. But why the huge block of magnetite, which has magnetic properties and makes contact with the rock beneath the building? Is this directing magnetic energy somehow into the building? I don't know. It's weird. But it reminds me of this card, the Devil, from A.E. Waite's Tarot Pack. And there you can see the Devil sitting on a block of stone. And you've got these two figures, male and female, chained to the block. You'll notice that is depicted the devil or Satan sitting on a rock as his throne. Two human figures are chained to the rock, one male and the other female. They're reminiscent of Adam and Eve, with horns like the devil himself. They have the mark of the beast. What is most interesting, though, is that the chains are only loosely round their necks. They could escape if they wished. However, they are brainwashed and believe the lies the devil has told them. Consequently, they stand passively, naked and foolish. My guess is that those who run the UN are Luciferians too. They are Illuminati, who share the same creed as Blavatsky and Bailey. This is that the devil, or Lucifer, is really the good guy in the Bible story. Their plan is to do away with nations and institute a one-world government. Having done away with the nations, the plan is for the beast to rule the world through the elite as overseers of the United Nations in Geneva. Now, I'll say no more about Luciferianism except to say that it's at the root of most of what is generally speaking called occultism. And I want you to think about this very carefully, especially if you've been a Christian and you're now skeptic, because there are things which are difficult to understand and are not explained by the church. There's very, very few people in the church who are capable of explaining these things. And you need to have a certain education to be able to see it. But we have to be aware of there's only one thing you really, really need to know. And that is that we are living on a fallen planet. And because this planet is fallen, we don't have the objectivity to see that we are in the trap. Does that make sense to you? So the idea is that the purpose of Christianity is not to make you clever. You're clever anyway. You might not be clever in this life, but your soul is clever. It's to rescue you and bring you back up, what you might call the ray of creation, back up to God. It's not to make you master of this planet. It's not even. I'm actually enjoy watching what Elon Musk is doing with his rockets and things. But the purpose of us as humans is not to go and build colonies on Mars. Not really. We might do it, but that is not our purpose. Our purpose is to find God in ourselves and to return up the ray of creation, to sit at the right hand of the Father. So I want to leave this with you, that you are in a situation where you have a choice of which mark you take. Are you going to take the mark of Christ, which is in, I think it was chapter 7, wasn't it, where that's talked about? Or are you going to take the mark of the beast and say, well, I don't believe in any of that Christian rubbish. I believe in, using the brain and we'll understand things. When you're dead, you're dead. You're in your worm food. You're gone. Forget it. There's no immortality. There's no reason to life. That's the Darwinian version, which is also a lie. And I've done programs on Darwin, which you can have a look at. Or you're going to say, well, actually, I'm a spiritual person. I'm a soul living in a body. And this soul needs to return to God, where it belongs. That is the true Christian path. And that is the most important thing to know. If you don't know that, then you have the mark of the beast. So if you think that all you are is just this body, and you're living in a material world and you're a piece of material, nothing better than a worm, then you have the mark of the beast and you will be judged accordingly. So I hope this isn't too horrifying for you, but I'm telling you how it is. And hopefully you'll spread this lecture around and get other people to watch it, because it is important. And don't miss out on part 1 as well. And the other parts, if you've got the time, go through them, because there's a lot I've put in there. So thank you very much for your time.